this new season. And so this morning I wanted to talk about focus and how our focus needs to be on Jesus. And so so this morning we are to be focused on Jesus. Tomorrow we are to be focused on Jesus. Us as a church, we need to be focused on Jesus. Now, how many of you remember learning to ride a bike? Yeah? Well, when I was younger, my sister had the fun task of teaching me to ride a bike. And bravely, she let me use her bike. And she spent, I don't know how long, trying to teach me to ride a bike. And of course, it would fall over. And it got to a point where I was just frustrated. Like, I can't ride a bike. I keep falling over. I don't see any improvements. What's the point? Like, I just want to stop. Right? And I'm sure that point came after one of the more severe falls, a bigger scrape or in knees, arms, hands. And it's just like, I don't want to go through this pain. And my sister lovingly kind of came around when I was in a bit of a better mood and say, hey, let's get back to learning the bike, okay? I was like, fine. And we got back to it, and wouldn't you know, I fell again. I'm sure I fell a few more times, but eventually I got the hang of it. And once you learn to ride a bike, it just opens a whole new world of possibilities, right? You can go faster, you can go further, you can go quicker. Like, it's just so much wonderful. I could go and visit my friend down the street so much faster than walking. And it was like, I'm glad I didn't give up on riding this bike. Well, in grade 8, I found out that I wasn't as proficient at riding a bike as I thought I was. I was biking home. We had moved closer to Ottawa at that point, and I was biking home from my bus stop because I was technically outside the boundaries of the school, and so I had to bike or walk to the bus stop every morning and bike back. And so this time I was biking back, and I decided, well, let's try to do some wheelies or catwalks or whatever you want to call it, right? Like, I know how to ride a bike. This is going to be cool when I can show people I can do this. Well, wouldn't you know it, I didn't end up looking cool. Instead, I ended up looking like I had a broken right arm. Because that's what happened. I got a bit distracted, and as soon as you take your eyes off of what you're trying to do, it just went wrong. I fell, bent the front tire. Funny thing it was actually my sister's bike at that point too. And bent the front tire, broke my right arm, and thankfully there was it was a tractor dealership that I remember walking into, holding my arm, and, can I use your phone? But in that moment, and in learning to ride a bike, it was one of the things you learn pretty quickly, and learning to drive. It's focus. Where are you looking? Where are you focused on? Because where you're focused on is where you end up, right? Especially when you're learning to ride a bike, when you're focused this way, but as soon as you turn, your whole body turns when you're not used to it. And so you start trying to look like you know what you're doing, and then whoop, and then you fall over. When I was trying to do that trick, well, I looked over and ended up going the way I was looking. And it's the same with life. What we focus on is where we end up. What we focus on is where we end up. You can, as you get more experience biking or riding a car or driving a car, you can maybe divert your focus to look at your surroundings. But if you do that too long, well, you're not going to stay straight on the road. As rumble strips remind me. And so this Sunday, I just want to remind us, we need to be ever focused on Christ. We need to be ever focused on Jesus. And as simple as that sounds, it can be difficult. You know what? This past week, we thought we had a sale on our house that ended up not going through. And you know what? That kind of took my focus a little bit. Right? And just different things pop up. Like, okay, now we got to go through more showings. And it just takes your focus of like, okay, we got to get this done. And sometimes you do have to focus to get things done. But we need to make sure that behind that all, I need to make sure that my focus stays on Jesus. Because his timing in all this is better than the timing I could come up with. Hindsight is 20/20. I can look back and be like, well, you know what? I originally wanted things to go this way, this way, this way. And I'm really glad they didn't. I'm really glad they didn't. And when we lose focus on Christ, that's when we start to panic. That's when we start to worry. That's when we start to try and come up with our own ways of doing things. But when we focus on Jesus, that song that says, when you focus on Christ, the worries of this world fade away. And the things of earth grow strangely dim. And it's like, you know what? When I focus on him, it's like, yeah, okay, there's chaos going around, but it's going to be okay. And when we focus on him, we have freedom, we move forward, and we find fulfillment. This morning I want to read from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1-3. A verse I'm sure many of us may know quite well, but it is always a good reminder. Hebrews 12, 1-3. And it starts, therefore. And I'm going to stop there. Therefore. I always want people to be students and students of the Scripture, right? Like, I want you to be able to read the Bible in a way that you can challenge me and talk about it. And just like if you were to start a book and you started in a book and it said, therefore, you'd be wondering what comes first, right? Like, therefore what? If I said to you, therefore, you should eat some chocolate cake. Well, I mean, maybe you wouldn't want to be wondering what comes first. Be like, let's eat some chocolate cake. But if I said, if you read before, and this is something I need to remember, well, since I've been working out, since I've been eating well, you know what? Therefore, I can have some chocolate cake. Well, you know what? Maybe I don't want to listen to that first part. But it's important to know the context. And so we're actually going to read in Hebrews chapter 11, and we're going to start in 39. But I'm going to give kind of a summary. The author of Hebrews is writing this letter, this kind of sermon to these people that are under pressure to go back to their old ways of Judaism, to go back to the old laws, to do things a certain way, and to essentially reject the newfound freedom that Christ brought. And so the author of Hebrews, he's going through point by point of like, here's what the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures that you have read, the Old Testament, what they point to. Here's the purpose of them. And so he gets to Hebrews chapter 11 and he goes through all of these incredible people with these amazing stories, right? He mentions Abraham, he mentions Ruth, he mentions Gideon and all these incredible people that have just life stories that are inspiring. But he gets to a point and he says, the reason that we read of their lives is because they were hoping in something beyond them, something greater. Their lives point to something else. And so Hebrews chapter 11, verses 39 to 40 says this: these were all commended for their faith. He says, these people that you look up to, these people that you read about, they were commended for their faith. Yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. He says they were looking forward to something. God spoke to them about something ahead. And he says, guess what? We get to see the full picture. And so he then continues in Hebrews 12, verses 1 to 3. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, or the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Growing up, when I heard this, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and this idea of a race, I always pictured this like crowd of people, or like a stadium of people that was just like in the clouds watching my life, right? And it was more of that intimidation that I felt. It's like, well, since you have people watching your every move, you should do this. How many of you, I mean, let's be honest, we all can feel pretty intimidated when we have someone of experience watching over us try something new for the first time, right? When I'm fishing with someone, I was talking to Mark about fishing earlier. When I'm fishing with someone who's an avid fisherman, I'm a little nervous. I like fishing, but I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what lures to grab. I'm just going to put a little bait on, throw it out, hope for the best. Or maybe not put bait on, because I guess that's what lures are for. And it's intimidating when you have these people of experience watching you when you start out. And so I would read this and think like, man, I've got all these people that this author is writing about, like they have such great faith and they're watching you. It's like, well, hope I can measure up. Most of the time I felt like they're watching me and I'm like, When I started pastoring, I was fresh out of Bible college. I was at that point where I felt like I knew everything and yet knew I didn't know how to do stuff. And I started pastoring in Peterborough. And at that church, there were a bunch of retired pastors and retired and current professors. And I had just graduated Bible college. And so part of me was like, I realized that after I had started working there. And I was like, oh man, like I've got these people of great experience, of great knowledge, and they're watching me start out. I better not mess up. And there was a bit of intimidation there. But you know what? As I went on, they ended up being some of the most encouraging people in my life. They would, after speaking a sermon that I wasn't totally confident about, they would say, good job. where they say, we've seen how much you've improved. You're doing amazing. They were the first ones to offer encouragement, not advice when I wasn't seeking it. They didn't come to me and say, well, you could have done this better. No, they would offer advice when I asked for it. But they were just all in, like, keep going, keep going. And so when the author says this great cloud of witnesses, there's a bit of that encouragement, but it's more alluding to maybe a witness in a courtroom. Somebody who's experienced something. And so these witnesses are saying, hey, this is my life. This is my story. Look how amazing God was in spite of my failures. And so the author's saying, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses that are saying, this is what God did, this is what God did, this is what he's going to do. He said, let's move on. Let's move forward. And so as we focus on Jesus, he says, fix your eyes on Jesus. When we do that, we find freedom. We have freedom. When we realize more and more who Jesus was and what he did, who Jesus is and what he did, that's when I feel more free. When I realize that Jesus knows me, everything about me, in my worst times, in my best times. And he says, yeah, I died for that. And I rose from the dead for that. That's when I find, hey, I can keep going. And I don't have to worry about the failures as much anymore. Because my focus isn't on that. It's on Jesus. And I don't worry about my past failures. We find freedom. And as I mentioned, what you focus on is where you end up. And this in Psalms, one of the authors writes that what you focus on, you become. Psalms chapter 115, verses 8, put it so beautifully. And those who make idols are just like them, as are all who trust in them. And now you may be thinking, well, I'm not making idols. In the Old Testament, they would take materials, rocks or wood or whatever. They'd carve idols and they'd set them up. They worship them. And it's like, well, I don't do that. But we can still, at any time that something takes center stage over Jesus, it becomes our idol. And has the potential to become our idol. And when you focus on money, well, all your decisions end up being based on how much you're going to make, how much it's going to cost, what you're going to end up with in your bank. When that's your focus, that's going to consume how you live. When your focus is on how you feel, when your focus is on what makes you feel good, well, back to that chocolate cake. Maybe you'll end up eating too much of it. I've been there. Maybe you'll end up doing stuff that just isn't productive. But when we focus on Jesus, we find freedom from all that. It doesn't consume us. The stress of money, yeah, it's there. The stress of work, of time, the stress maybe of relationships. Yeah, it can take our focus. But when we come and focus on Jesus, we find freedom from that stress. Say, God, I can't do anything else. I need to give this to you. And I'm just going to focus on you. And I think that's one of the importance of Sunday mornings, coming together. No matter whether you've had a good week, a bad week, together we come and say, you know what? I'm putting aside everything. And we're going to focus on Jesus. As a church, we need to be people that focus on Jesus. And through that, we can move forward. As we focus on Jesus, the author says, well, cast aside everything. And he doesn't make it sound super easy. He does say that everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. He's honest. He's like, you know what? This trips us up pretty easily. But he also says, throw it off. Throw it off. And through that, we move forward. We move forward to what God has for us. See, I don't believe that God wants us to just sit around and just do nothing. I think God is a creative God. And he wants us to do something with the gifts that he's given us. And through the freedom that we receive, he says, move forward into all the good things that I have for you. Move forward into the redemption that I've provided through Jesus. We could get focused on just what we do here. We could get focused on the songs that we sing. We could get focused on the treats that we're going to have right after this. We could get focused on the programs, the carpet, the paint. You could get focused on a number of things. And it would stall what God wants to do. But when we focus on Jesus, all of that stuff falls into place. Yeah, there's sometimes going to have to be decisions that we need to make. We're going to want to do stuff, right? But we need to keep Jesus as the primary focus of the why we're doing things. And through that, we can move forward into what God has for us. The author says, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. I find it just wonderful. He says, fix our eyes on Jesus. He says, why? Well, Jesus started it and he finished it. Jesus is the goal and the way. He's everything. Keeps it easy. And through focusing on Jesus, we find fulfillment. I think a lot of the issues that we find in our world, in my life, in our own lives, it's finding out how can we be fulfilled in what we do and who we are. And more, I'm just convinced that we just need to be connected to the Creator, the one who made us, who knows us perfectly, knows exactly what he made us to be. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Through Jesus, we have that connection to God. We have that connection to the one who says, hey, I know this about you, and this is why I created you that way. And I'm going to use your experiences and your talents to bring the redemption that I have given you through Jesus, to bring it to other people. And I think that's part of our fulfillment. Maybe it's not through words, right? Some of us like talking. Some of us don't. And that's good. Some of us like creating things. Some of us like doing things in the background. Some of us love singing. Some of us love writing or painting. Through all of those talents, God says, I want to use them and bring you fulfillment in them as you fix your eyes on Jesus. And through what you do and say, others begin to look towards Jesus. The author of Hebrews says this in Hebrews 4, verses 13 to 16. And this can be intimidating. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Sometimes that's like, ooh. And yet, when we realize the character of God, it's wonderful. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. Therefore, since we have a great high priest, again, the author alludes to the priest system of the Jewish scriptures and Jewish tradition, of which he says Jesus is the greatest, the fulfillment of it. Since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. What an incredible statement. Jesus is able to empathize with us perfectly. Not sympathize, or it's like, oh, like, I'm sorry you feel that way, but empathize. I know how that feels. Jesus has felt grief. He has felt sorrow. He has felt great pain. He has felt joy. The fact that he would not just say, I'm not going to go there, but said, you know what, I'm going to put my divinity aside in the sense that I'm going to become human so that I can relate with them. Like, that's incredible. And in that, we can find the most fulfilling relationship that we could ever want. The most fulfilling relationship we need. In the highs and the lows, Jesus understands and he loves perfectly. And it says, let us therefore approach God's throne of grace. If you want a picture of God's throne of grace, or God's throne, one of the pictures kind of given, you can look up Ezekiel, read through the first part of Ezekiel, and you'll probably be scratching your head. But it talks about this just crazy, mind-boggling throne. And I often wonder, what is it like to be to actually experience what Ezekiel did, to be in this throne room of God? And if I'm realistic, I'm probably not saying much. Like think of the most incredible, breathtaking thing you've ever seen. Well, I mean, God created that. He's above that. And yet through Jesus, we can approach God with confidence. Not pride, not arrogance, but confidently, knowing that he loves us. So, as a church, as followers of Jesus, We need to be focused on Jesus in all that we do, in all that we say. What we choose to do, when we sing, we need to get this focus off of me and focus on Jesus. Focus off of others and focus on Jesus together. And that's one thing that I have loved about this church, is that together we just come and we sing, sitting, standing. We're here together, and the focus is not us. It's Jesus and the God we serve. So let's keep focusing and holding firm to Jesus. Through that, we will find the freedom we need and bring it to other people. The name of this church, Real Hope. It wasn't about this building being something of hope for people. It was about the people. I'm sure I can speak on that. It was about the hope that we have through Jesus that others can experience too. We can find freedom. We can move forward and find fulfillment and bring that to a world that needs it. Now, before I welcome Pastor Dave Blakely up, I'd love to pray. Father, you know our hearts and our minds. You know our past. You know our present. You know what's ahead. God, help us to focus on Jesus. Help us to focus on his words of truth, on his life, his sacrifice, and his redemption. Help us to be people that say, this is what I have, and it's Jesus. God, I really believe that what you have given us is far greater than anything else we could hope for or want. And yet you know that I so often get distracted. Help me to be focused on Jesus. Help us to be focused on Jesus. We thank you so much for the grace that you have given us. May we be people that turn other people's focus to Jesus. Pray all this in your name. Amen. I honestly, the only thing of worth that I can offer is Jesus. And yeah. All right, Pastor David, I'll invite you to come on up.